Shalom, and welcome to another lesson in the series, The People of Israel Are Coming Home. We're studying the book of Joshua. Today we will study the book of Joshua, chapter 15, Perek Tetvav. It is a very long chapter. As a matter of fact, it's, I think, the longest one in the book of Joshua. We're talking about 63 verses. We are beginning, finally, to distribute the land. I want to start reading not from the first verse, but actually from the last verse of the previous chapter. The verse concludes with the words, V'ha'aretz shakta mimilchama, and the land had respite from war. It's very strange that verse appears there because chapter 14, if we recall, deals with giving the land of Kalev, not talking about any war. So what does it mean that the land had respite from war? This is actually just an interesting point. That verse, Ha'aretz shakta mimilchama, the land had respite from war, appears once again earlier. There it appears in place. And I'm referring to the end of chapter 11, where the conclusion of the conquering of the land by Joshua. It says that Joshua takes the land, and he managed to overcome all of the obstacles on the way. And the final words of chapter 11 are V'ha'aretz shakta mimilchama, and the land had respite from war. In the Tanakh, we find very often that when the Tanakh wants to use a parentheses, where they don't have parentheses in the time of Tanakh, what do? They conclude with a phrase, and they conclude once again with the phrase, and we know that everything in the middle there is actually sort of a parenthesis. What did we have in those parentheses? We could have easily continued from the final description of the conquering of the land by Joshua. In the end of chapter 11, we could easily continue right from there to chapter 15, where he begins dividing the land. In the midst, we found a few messages which we spoke about. We spoke about the fact that God is with us, repeating the word echad, echad. We spoke about the fact describing the division of the land, the distributing of the land by Moses, which reminds us again that what everything Joshua is going to be doing here will be in the footsteps of Moses. And we find the message that we spoke about in our last lesson about the fact that Kalev was determined and ready not to wait for miracles, but actually to take his future in his own hands. And this is what the parentheses added to us, reminding us we're continuing the footsteps of Moses. We are in the shadow of God, and we can't wait for a miracle to happen. We have to do it, take our destiny in our own hands. And from here we begin chapter 15. I'm not going to read every single verse. It's a very long chapter. We just want to summarize what the chapter talks about. Verses 1 to 12 summarize the southern border of the land of Israel and the border of the tribe of Judah. And that is because Judah sits on the southern part of the land of Canaan. And I'm saying the land of Canaan, not the land of Israel, first of all because it had not yet been part of the land of Israel, not been declared as the land of Israel, but not only that. The land of Israel, as we know, was promised to Abraham, appears several times in the book of the Torah as the land from the river to the river. We're talking about the Euphrates and the Nile. This is the land of Israel. The land of Israel is a very, very wide land. But what was distributed to the tribes is the land of Canaan. The border of the land of Canaan, which was the portion received by Judah, begins through the desert of Tzin, north of the desert of Paran, beginning on the west from what's called Nachal Mitzrayim, the brook of Egypt, which today is called Wadi El Arish, and it goes through Kadesh Barnea, through the desert of Tzin, all the way until beneath the Dead Sea. It will then include everything in the Dead Sea, and the northern border will be a little below Jericho, a little below Jerusalem, all the way through the Nachal Sorek, the brook of Sorek, all the way to the Mediterranean, where the west and the eastern border are the Mediterranean Sea, the Yam HaGadol, and the Dead Sea, Yam HaMelach. This is the border of the land of Judah. Judah received a very great land. Then we have a few verses 13 to verse 19, which tells us the story of how Caleb manages to overcome the giants in Hebron, and his nephew, Otniel ben Knaz, receives two things: the city of Dvir and Caleb's daughter, Achsa. Caleb's daughter, Achsa, which we see a little pinch of a hint, and we'll see it again later on, where there are very quiet characters, female characters, who seem not important, not as important as those male Caleb and Otniel and all the others. But the book teaches us that their quiet wisdom makes a change. And Achsa, she says, I need water. She talks from the bottom of her heart. She talks from the bottom of her stomach. She talks from the rational, realistic land. And she receives, together with her husband Otniel, the nephew of Caleb, they received the land of Dvir and two main springs, Gulot Ilit and Gulot Tachtit, the upper and the lower spring. Then from verse 20 all the way to the end of the chapter, at verse 63, we have the very, very detailed description of the land of Judah. The land of Judah is divided into 5 regions. 5 regions. We are beginning with verse 21, Banegev, in the south, in the Negev. We're continuing in verse 33, Pasuk Lamed Gimel, Bashfela, the lowland. The lowland is what's between the hills of Judah and, I would say, the valley beside the shore of the Mediterranean Sea, the lowlands. And then we have the Bahar, which appears in verse 48, Bahar, which is on the hills, and this is the main center part of the land. And that is very important to understand why. When the people of Israel come to the land of Israel, come to the land of Canaan, they take over the land, it's very difficult for them to settle in the valleys. There are 3 major valleys. The valley of the Dead Sea, or throughout the long side of the eastern side of the land, meaning throughout the Jordan Valley and the Dead Sea, all the way down to the southern border. That's one valley. The next valley is near the Mediterranean, and these are the 2 length valleys. I'm talking about the 2 valleys that go from north to south. And there's one valley up north which goes from east to west, and that's Emek Yisrael, famous because of Megiddo there. But what we are referring to is those valleys were very difficult for the Israelites to conquer, and that is because the people of the Canaans had vehicles. They had iron vehicles which the Israelites did not have, and therefore they had neglected the mountains because those vehicles were very, very difficult for them to settle on the mountains. The mountains were pretty much deserted, so the people of Israel managed to settle in the desert, in the mountains. So once again, I'm referring to the people of Judah. We said 5 regions: the desert, the hills, the lowlands, the valley of the shore, and the Negev, the south. If we get this picture and we understand it as we see on the map, we can see that Judah gets a very, very big portion. And this is something we should understand also. Where we will be seeing the division of the land, it will seem like a lot of geography, many, many cities. Some of them we know where they are today, some of them we don't know where they are today. But we have to remember a few things. First of all, the land of Israel is the only place in the world where you can hold the book in your hand and see with your own eyes the reality as described in the book. And we see the geography, the topography has not changed much. The people of Israel are coming home. But the other thing which is very important to understand, that we are here in the footsteps of what was described in the book of Genesis. And the book of Genesis concludes in chapter 49, where Jacob calls upon his children and he divides the land. And he appoints Judah to be the leader of all the tribes. Yehudah, I'm reading in chapter 49, verse 8. Yehudah, your brothers will concede to you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. The sons of your fathers will prostrate themselves to you. Ata yoducha achecha yadcha be'oref oivecha yishtachavu lecha b'nei avicha. Gur aryeh Yehudah. Judah, you are a lion cub. Miteref b'nei alita. Kara ravatz ke'aryeh. You are like a lion who will be able to raise, and lo yasur shevet mi Yehudah. The kingdom leadership will be in Judah. We will see this going on all throughout almost the entire book. The kingdom of David, all the way down till the future when the Messiah will be arriving. The book describes to us that Judah is the leading tribe, and therefore the land of Judah is described in so detail. He takes a great portion of the land, and that is because he is, as promised by Jacob, to lead the people of Israel. He has to be able to understand the land in all of its different difficulties. The south, the north, the mountains, the hills, the lowlands, the valleys, the desert. Totally different climate, totally different topography. Judah has to know and recognize land so that he will understand the obstacles of all the other tribes. And then he will be able to show leadership. And this is what we see here in chapter 15. After we understood the borders of the land, we understood the wisdom of that achsa and the vision of Kalev with his being determined to take his destiny in his own hand. The people of Judah, the first tribe, the leading tribe, gets to feel the land on all of its different views of all the horizons, of all the difficulties and topography and geography. He will then, later on, with David and his son Solomon, be able to lead the people of Israel. Shalom.